Now this Swiss chard is still hanging in here, outside, so I guess we have to hang in there with it.
Well, we knew it was coming. Our first really measurable snow of the winter. We're not in winter yet. Covered up our garden as best we could here. Brought a lot of our potted plants inside. One of the benefits of growing in pots is you can actually bring them inside a little bit. And we still got our covered area of the garden down here, so we're expecting about an inch today. That's what I'm hearing, about an inch of snow. Once this stops, we'll get these uncovered. It's actually not too cold out right now. It's probably about 30, 31 degrees. Everything here can handle that temperature just fine. Just gotta make sure we protect them a little bit and see what happens next. Wonderland of Snow. They're really trying to push us inside, aren't they?
The only green that's left out here, the only green anywhere, is the green that's sitting right inside of our garden. And that's pretty exciting for the end of November. Even though we are at the end of November, we still have so much growing in our fall garden. I guess we're almost to the point where we could call it a winter garden now. And while we've had to cover everything up at nighttime multiple times now, because our evening temperatures are dropping down pretty drastically, we still have plenty out here that we're going to be able to harvest here in the upcoming weeks. Now you can see that one of the side effects of this cooler weather is that while the kale is still very fresh, crisp leaves, we do have it slowing down its growth. So these aren't nearly as big or as tall or prolific as some of their cousins that were planted earlier. But that being said, if you can look closely here, you'll see that even if they're a little smaller, they're still growing. This kohlrabi is a couple inches in diameter still. These cauliflower, on the other hand, well, they have a bit of a challenge. If you look closely, you can see the coloration on these doesn't quite look right. Not on all of them, but on most of them. What we think happened is when we covered them with plastic, even though we gave the plastic some supports to keep them up off the plants, there was some rain followed by some very cold night weather, and it seems as though those cauliflower were, the plastic may have touched them a little bit. And one of the things we're learning about when to plant and what our fall garden looks like is just how challenging it can be to see full plant development if you wait just a few weeks too long. And these cabbages are looking nice, but the question is, will they develop big enough, full enough heads? And my guess is that we might be limited in some ways in terms of how they produce. But again, that's part of the learning process that we're going through in planting a fall garden. Just like when we're learning about how obsessed the rabbits seem to be with our beets. Some nice purple kohlrabi coming in here. You can see that it's probably, 2 inches in diameter. These are really tasty. We just had our first purple kohlrabi recently. And one of the things I'm most excited about are these broccoli heads. I mean, look at the size of these, as big as my hand. Again, these are those plants that you grow and you see sit there with absolutely no development, it seems, and then all of a sudden these heads spring up almost overnight. And you can see just how beautiful they are. We're going to be able to harvest those pretty quickly. Now we move into the forest of our Daikon radishes, and if you look closely here, you can see through all of this beautiful foliage some really nice sized Daikon radishes in here. Some really nice sized radishes. These are probably 8 or 10 inches long, easily 8 or 10 inches long, and most of them are the same size. And right next door to that we have some of our purple cauliflower, and this variety I'm afraid isn't going to fully develop, but you can see that there are some cabbage moth worms on here still. And nobody likes these, but it's pretty impressive that they're still around given the fact that we've had multiple days below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, below 0 degrees Celsius. And they're still out here, they're definitely still alive, still trying to eat up our plants. So I'm going to take a little bit of time here and get them off there, because we don't want those hanging out with us. I would argue that our hay bale salad bar was an absolute success. We've probably harvested 30 days worth of salads off here so far at least, and there are more still out here. Although, again, they don't like that cold weather, and neither, of course, do these grapevines. You can see the remains of that bird's nest. As we move toward our hoop house area, our raised bed hoop house area, one of the things that we noticed in here, and it's been again a couple weeks since we've looked in here, but the greens are still looking pretty fresh. The spinach, the broccoli, the cauliflower, all these greens are looking fresh. But because this plastic isn't clear plastic, some of those plants have gotten leggier, reaching towards some of the light that's not there. And we don't uncover it every single day, which is probably something we should do. But you can see the spinach here is looking fantastic still, ready to harvest for sure. Some of our kohlrabi in here and some of the other plants that should be developing around the roots are, but maybe a little bit slower. I'm not sure if that's going to be the worst thing in the world. But one of the things that we did notice here is that if you look closely, you can see some damage to some of these spinach leaves. And that's where the plastic came into contact with the leaves as they were hanging over the bed and created a little bit of frostbite. But overall, everything in here is still looking great, looking healthy. Like it's a different world, a different environment in here. Here's some of our snap peas, our sugar snap peas, still growing. And I think they'll probably keep going here for at least another couple weeks. The one thing that we also noticed in here, though, is these are some more of our beets. And the beets are developing some of the beet root there, but they're not all that big, maybe a ½ inch to 3/4 of an inch so far in some cases. In other cases, we definitely need to see more development. It's not quite there yet. And part of our reasoning behind this, we think, is, again, the need to be more frequent in our uncovering of this area. The challenge is getting out here every day to do it, and the temperatures are not always getting up that warm anyway. These are some Daikon radishes. Again, we're getting a lot of greenery, a lot of foliage, and the daikons themselves are there. They aren't nearly as developed as those that are left out to the natural sunlight. So it's kind of a give and take in that regard. It might also have something to do with the level of nitrogen in the soil, which is something we'll need to test in the future as well. Now, as we come over here, you can see, again, we planted more kohlrabi this time around. Probably then we'll know what to do with it, but that's absolutely fine, especially after we had those initial harvests of kohlrabi that were just so delicious. We wanted to see what we could still grow, what we could experiment with. And this will help us, if you watched our video talking about how to maximize those small spaces, understanding our timeline and better understanding our timeline is going to help us plan this out in the future, so that what we're seeing now with this nice small broccoli head, what we're seeing now is something that we can improve on. So it won't be just about making sure it's covered in the cold weather, but planting it early enough that it develops well. Oh, and here we are here at the end, where some of that cold wind can get inside, and you can see it's frostbit a little bit of that broccoli. But overall, again, a nice set of greens inside there. As we come out to our main garden, this is some of our collard greens, which are still growing great. We've been using a lot more of these in our smoothies in the mornings, which has been fantastic. We've been holding off on harvesting these Brussels sprouts, even though, quite frankly, we're ready. We want them. We want to eat them. You can see how many they produce. These plants are so prolific. We will definitely be planting more of those next season. And here we have some of those nice broccoli florets that came in after we had already harvested the main broccoli heads off of these. And I really can't stress my love for this next area enough. Our Smoothie Garden area has been going from April all the way up to December, and it's going to keep going. Now granted, the celery does not look great. That does not handle the cold weather nearly as well as this kale. This kale is still in great shape. Perfectly fresh. We're keeping it out here. Some of this will survive snow. I mean, it'll do great for much longer this season. And granted, you can see it's not nearly what it was before. It's not as big as it was before because we've been harvesting off this again every single day. Consider that longevity. Every single day from, say, May, because we waited a little while after we planted it, but from May till December and beyond, And I know I said this before, but this area of our garden, which is the corner of our main garden, is definitely the latest area that we planted. And we're still seeing some of those broccoli heads show up here. And we're still seeing plenty of greens that we can look at. There's beginnings of a cauliflower here. We're still seeing some greens that we're able to harvest. Now, I come out here regularly and pull off a few leaves here and there, not enough to cause any harm to the plant, but from the Swiss chard that's in here, from some of the other, you can see here on the right, that's the Swiss chard, from some of the broccoli, some of the cauliflower, because those leaves are so delicious. We add them in, chop them up, steam them, boil them, however you like to prepare them, but we're still able to get out of this garden already. And especially since it's a garden that may or may not produce in the long run, depending on how cold it gets here at the end of the season. You know, that piece that we really can't control. But you can see, we're still getting produce. You can see some of our beets in the grow bags. These actually have a pretty decent sized ball in them already. They're a little bit drooping right now because of that cold weather, but we're trying to keep them watered. That will help them a little bit, help them maintain in that cool weather. But this is just, again, some of our kohlrabi, planting it in a different way, a different method than in ground, just to see how it performs. And these beds, I mean, you can see the purple kohlrabi here doing pretty well. In these containers, we're seeing some pretty good results. But just look at the size of the kohlrabi in these containers. We're talking 3.5 inches, 4 inches in diameter. So these are actually already at harvest size. They won't be woody at all. They'll be nice and tender, flavorful. These are growing great. So I think that's one thing that we're learning. Being able to separate these out, give them plenty of space in these individual containers really pays off. So this is something we're going to continue to do in the future for sure. And look at these carrots. We've been waiting and waiting to harvest these. The ground is still thawed. It's not frozen, so they're doing fine. And look at the size. Again, for a late crop, a late fall crop, these are looking fantastic. And these aren't the only ones that we have to harvest. We also have these in our small raised beds, these carrots. And even though the foliage isn't all that much, they've actually developed into about 3 or 4 inches, most of them 5 inches in length. Nice sized carrots. So we're going to harvest these pretty soon as well. I think the main theme to take from all of this is that we are seeing an impressive amount of growth still this late in the season. You can see these holes right here. These are voles looking for food that isn't there. Man, I don't know how they get up these raised beds. These are a good 20 inches off the ground. This is a nice purple kohlrabi. It's been in the ground for quite some time. This is actually the area where we picked our last kohlrabi, our first purple. So good. And again, we're seeing a little bit of the frost damage. These have actually been uncovered in the bed. Some of our Bok Choy, some of our other greens here have been uncovered, but they're still performing well enough. And again, overall, we're looking at what we can pull from the garden this late in the season. These are some more of our Daikon radishes. These radishes have been growing great for the last, 45, 50 days. We've left these in the ground longer, again, just to see what we can get size-wise. If it was middle of the season, they wouldn't stay in the ground that long. And the last spot we come to is, again, our Bok Choy and some of our beets in here. Look at the color here. And the beets definitely have, again, another inch and a half diameter beet roots on here so far. We're going to let those develop even during this cool season. And on top of that, you see it right there, our Bok Choy. Look at how luscious that is. This is surviving 26, 27 degree weather and still perfectly crisp. It's going to be delicious.
If this kind of weather continues, we'll definitely be inside before you know it. But while we can, we're going to stay out here and keep as much in the ground as possible. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give us a like, leave us a comment, don't forget to share and subscribe, and remember, when you're with us, you're good to grow.